Good afternoon and hello everyone. My name is Rich Longo and I'll be your host for today's presentation. Thank you for joining us for another Flycast Partners webinar. Today's webinar is ITIL 4 and some of the small things that are coming along with ITIL 4 from our very own Chuck Spencer. Chuck is our lead enterprise service management practitioner and has a very accomplished background that includes Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, ITIL V3 expert, along with ITIL 4 certifications, and he's been working on those nonstop since it's come out with multiple certifications, including ISO 20000 Manager and Consultant, COBIT 5, PMP Agile Scrum Master, and Change Management Practitioner. Chuck has over 25 years of experience in improving and implementing service management processes to drive quality, efficiency, and customer satisfaction. Is innovative and results-oriented senior technology leader with progressive experience in all phases of service management, project and process management, enterprise technical support, and organizational leadership and strategic development. That is a mouthful. In other words, Chuck knows what he's doing. So before we get started, Chuck, let me introduce our organization. Flycast Partners is here to deliver a seriously amazing IT experience. We were founded and staffed by personnel have many years of experience in the IT space, and they took the best ideas from these collective experiences, added the best components necessary to grow and become a leading value-added reseller in the North American IT market. We offer best-in-class implementation services and training in ISM, ITAM, ITOM, and enterprise service management workload automation spaces using ITIL best practice. Our professional service team can easily scale up or down to meet the IT needs of any customer, regardless of your size, complexity, or budgetary restrictions. We offer implementation services both on-site and remote, as well as training to reinforce your company's long-term IT success. Ongoing administration and support service offerings will enable your organization to focus on those normal day-to-day operations, saving you both precious time and money. I encourage you to reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST, that's 844-359-2278, or visit us on our website at www.flycastpartners.com. Folks, this is just but one of many weekly webinars that we show here at Flycast Partners. I encourage you to go to our website and pick out a webinar that interests you, or maybe possibly some of your coworkers. Share it around. Look at some of the training that we have upcoming. We'll have an ITIL 4 class actually coming up sometime in March. Once we hammer that date, we'll get that out on our website. And look at the various technologies that we offer here at Flycast Partners. I encourage you to chat with our IT experts Monday through Friday during normal business hours in the right-hand corner of our website. They'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. So with that being said, I am going to turn this presentation over to none other than Chuck Spencer. So let's go ahead and get this turned over to you, Chuck.
All right.
Excellent here. All righty, and there you go, sir. You should have the wheel.
All right, well, thank you, Rich. Let me get it set up to show the right screen here, just a moment. That looks good. All right, well, thanks again, Rich, and thanks to all of you for joining us for this ITIL overview. I would like to begin today's presentation with a bit of a history around ITIL to explain really how we got to ITIL 4 and why ITIL continually evolves and changes. You know, ITIL has been around as a best practice framework since the early 1980s, when the British government developed a project to develop a common set of guidelines for IT operations. And they wanted to create a body of knowledge around IT similar to what had been done for project management. And so they began to gather this knowledge in a series of books that became the IT Infrastructure Library. And if you think about what the IT world looked like back then, it was basically a mainframe world. I mean, PCs were just beginning to find a place in business, and networks were primarily point-to-point analog circuits. Well, they were circuits sometimes as well, but circuits. And the focus of these books was primarily on how to keep these systems and that technology available and stable, keep everything up and running. Now, the library quickly grew to around 17, 18 books, and so they decided to consolidate that in 2000, and they released ITIL version 2. And the focus here was still on maintaining the IT infrastructure. And of course, the two books from ITIL that were primarily focused around this were service support and service delivery. There were actually 7 books at that time, but these 2 were the ones that most organizations really focused on. The other books dealt with application development and some other topics, but again, really the focus here was really on the infrastructure. Now, in 2007, when ITIL V3 was released and then revised again in 2011, the focus shifted really to services, and the service lifecycle was introduced. Now, this was a significant change. However, application development was still a bit of a stepchild, and it was really a waterfall world when you think about it at the time. And other methodologies like Agile, which began to occur in 2001, and DevOps were really just starting to emerge and show value. And while these were recognized to some extent in ITIL version 3, everyone was really still struggling how to integrate these into ITIL and service management. Now, in 2013, the British government created Axelos as a joint venture to take ownership of ITIL, along with other best practice methodologies like Prince, Reslia, management of risk, and a number of other qualification-based methodologies. And one of the first things they created in ITIL was the ITIL practitioner course, which in many ways was the forerunner to ITIL 4. ITIL practitioner acknowledged and tried to better integrate with other methodologies and frameworks like Agile and DevOps and even Lean, which had actually come out long before ITIL, and adopt some of these same concepts and practices into service management. So much so that really the need to completely revamp the underlying foundation of ITIL was recognized, and work began on ITIL 4, which is what we're going to focus on and talk about today. So this has been, like I say, evolving over a period of time here. And the reason it evolves, of course, is because it's based on best practices. And the best practices of companies that are doing this and doing this well have evolved as the world around IT has evolved over these many years. So today what we're going to focus on are some of the new concepts that are within ITIL 4, talk a little bit of how those can be applied in your environment perhaps. We're going to talk about the 4 dimensions of service management. We'll talk about the service value system itself, which is really the kind of the core of ITIL 4. You're going to see that this replaces the service lifecycle in many ways, but I hate to use the word replace because it really doesn't replace it. It really just kind of takes it to the next level. Within the service value system, we'll talk about the components of the service value system, the ITIL guiding principles, governance, the service value chain, which is really kind of the meat in the sandwich here, if you will, the ITIL management practices themselves, and continual improvement. And you probably heard a new word there, perhaps, when I call these ITIL management practices. We'll talk about why that's occurring and why it's no longer just about processes when we talk about this anymore. And then we'll wrap things up today by talking a little bit about the ITIL 4 certification scheme and what you can do to become certified in ITIL and take this really to the next level. So let's begin with that discussion on the 4 dimensions of service management. These are really one of the key concepts within ITIL 4. Now, those of you familiar with ITIL 3 will really recognize this as just an expansion of the 4 Ps that were in ITIL version 3. You remember what those were? There were the people, process, partners, and products. So really this just, again, is there to give us a very holistic approach to service management. And organizations need to ensure that they really kind of balance the focus on each one of these dimensions to really enhance their capabilities for service management and work through each one of these. So let's walk through each one of these a little bit and talk about what these 4 dimensions really consist of. When we talk about organizations and people, we're talking about things like making sure that you have very well-defined roles and responsibilities for service management within the organization. Who's really doing what? And as part of that, you really need to have a good organizational structure so that people know who reports to whom, when something needs to be escalated, if something isn't working right, who it is they need to go talk to regarding that. So you have to have that well-defined organizational structure. Along with the organizational structure comes an organizational culture. Every organization has one. Every organization believes theirs is unique, and it really is, because the culture is made up of the people that are within that organization and what they bring to the table. And so you want to have that really strong organizational culture. Hopefully you've got service management kind of embedded into that culture if you're trying to do service management. Along with that, you also need to understand your staffing that you have and what competencies you have and what staffing and competencies you really need to deliver the services that you're delivering as part of your enterprise and part of your organization. Of course, understanding what the staffing and competencies are you need allows you to then start to look at, where would we need to bring in some partners and suppliers, and where would they be able to help us round this out a little bit and give us some competencies that maybe we don't have currently in the organization. When you're looking at your partners and suppliers, you want to make sure that they share in your goals and risk, and you've got some common goals and risk so that they've got some skin in the game as well into your success. You do want to have some formal contracts and agreements with those partners and suppliers so that you can hold them accountable for their performance. But you really want to get into the more strategic they are, the more collaborative you are, so that you really collaborate with them to achieve your outcomes. You're bringing these partners and suppliers on board for a reason, because you don't have some of these competencies, you don't have some of this staffing. So take advantage of everything that they can bring to the table in terms of experience and skills to really help you build your capabilities for service management. As part of this, you want to make sure that your partners and suppliers have a path for continual improvement, how they're going to continually improve their services. And then you also want to include them in your continual improvement efforts so that they're part of that. And again, they're bringing their knowledge and their experience and their skills to help you improve the services, the processes, the products, everything that you need to do to raise your level of capability for service management. Now, when we talk about information and technology, we're not just talking about the information and technology that you need to have as part of the service itself that you're delivering, or that you're offering, but also the information and technology that you need to have to manage those products and services. So we're looking at your workflow management systems, your monitoring systems, the knowledge bases that you need to have to be able to manage these products and services that you're offering. And then, of course, the technologies that are required, again, not just for the services that you're providing, but also to manage those. And along with that, the information and data that's needed, the information and data you need to collect as part of the products and services, and then the information and data that you need to collect to help you manage those products and services. Now, the last piece of this are the value streams and processes. And this 4 dimension is where we want to make sure that we have a really clear picture of what it is that we're delivering and how we're delivering it. And in doing that, we want to identify the different value streams. And we're going to talk a little bit more later in the presentation about what value streams are. You do want to understand who or what really is going to perform the different service actions that you have, the different pieces of the value stream or activities within the value stream. You also want to make sure that as part of these value streams and these processes, that you're always looking at ways to eliminate waste and make these as lean as possible. Make sure that they're focused on just things that really provide value to your consumers, your service consumers. And then finally, wherever you can, you want to look at ways to first optimize your processes, but then look at areas where you can automate these processes so that you can take the opportunity for human error out of that, but also free people up to do things that you really need people to do, and take a lot of those mundane tasks and shift those off so that your folks aren't really tied up with doing that sort of thing. So that's really a look at the 4 dimensions and what the 4 dimensions are made up of. And of course, there's another piece of this that factors in, and that's something that in ITIL we call PESTLE, which is our political factors, our economic factors, our legal factors, our technological factors. These are the things that really influence very often how you can develop these capabilities, how you can use your organizations and people, whether or not you're allowed to use partners and suppliers from a legal or compliance standpoint or regulatory standpoint, that sort of thing. So all of those factors kind of play against these 4 dimensions as well. Now, the 4 dimensions themselves really make up the underlying foundation for the rest of ITIL 4. This is what you're going to use to execute the service value system, to execute the activities in the service value chain, to execute your processes, practices, all of that. So again, a very important component and concept within ITIL 4. Now, I mentioned the service value system, and again, this is really a core concept around ITIL 4. And this system really provides a very powerful and flexible operating model for the management and governance of the products and services that you need to offer to create value for your customers and your stakeholders, as well as the organization of itself. Now, for those of you familiar with ITIL version 3, again, this service value system and the service value chain really takes the place of the service life cycle. And in doing that, offers a much more agile and flexible approach that was missing. The life cycle is not completely gone away, as I said. It's really embedded in these activities. A lot of times the ITIL version 3 service life cycle was considered by organizations to be kind of a linear approach, that you had to start with service strategy, then get into service design, then get into service transition, then get into service operations. And that was never really the case, but because of the way that it was graphically portrayed and the way it was discussed, that's very often what organizations thought. And sometimes organizations would even create silos around each stage of the life cycle and organize around those stages, which again was never the intent, but quite often that happened. So the ITIL 4 service value system was specifically designed to discourage that kind of siloed working and really enable flexibility. The service value chain activities and practices, as you're going to see, they don't form a rigid structure, but they can be combined into multiple value streams to address the needs of the organization in a variety of different scenarios based on what you need to do. Now, the service value system, as I mentioned earlier, is comprised of 5 components. And at the core of the service value system is a service value chain. The service value chain, which we're going to look at more closely later in this presentation, is really a set of interconnected activities that an organization performs to deliver a valuable product or service to its consumers by turning opportunity and demand into value. And ITIL 4 defines opportunity as the options or the possibilities that add value for the stakeholder. What are the things you could do for them? What are the services you really could offer? And of course, then demand is the actual demand for those services or those products from both internal and external customers, depending on the type of environment you're in. When we talk about value, value is the perceived benefits, the usefulness, the importance of something, whether that's a product or a service, to those customers and those stakeholders, and how well does it really help them achieve the outcomes that they need to be successful. Now, surrounding the service value chain are the 4 other essential components. First, the guiding principles. Now, these are a set of recommendations that we're going to talk about in the next set of slides here, but they're really there to guide the organization in all circumstances, regardless of any changes that you might have to your goals, your strategies, the type of work you're doing, your management structure. You're going to see that these guiding principles can still apply irregardless of those kind of changes in direction or shift. We'll talk very briefly today about governance. Governance, of course, is the means by which an organization is directed and controlled. Very important that you have governance around service management and around what you're doing with the service value chain, your practices and your processes. We'll also talk about the practices themselves. Now, the practices are really sets of organizational resources designed for performing work or accomplishing an objective. And the practices are all built around those 4 dimensions that we just mentioned. Within the practices, we'll talk about people and organization. We'll talk about information technology, partners and suppliers, the value streams and processes. And while ITIL version 3 was based on best practices, it really focused more on the processes. So ITIL 4 really encourages us to take a more holistic approach, and in doing so, organizes these things now into practices, which again, we're going to talk about in a few more slides here. Now, continual improvement, you're going to see later that continual improvement is also called out as a practice. It's part of the service value system. You'll also see that it's part of the service value chain. And the reason for that is it's such a critical function for an organization. It needs to be a recurring organizational activity that really is performed at all levels to ensure that the organization's performance continually meets stakeholder expectations and you're continually keeping up with the needs of the business and improving what you do to be able to help the business improve as well. So with that, let's start by talking about the guiding principles and take a look at how these work for us. Now, the guiding principles were first introduced as part of ITIL Practitioner, and they're really not specific to ITIL or even to IT service management, but they can really be applied to almost any initiative to make sure that you have a consistent approach. it really gives you a thought process for guiding your projects, your implementation, any business or any personal activity that you might be doing. I actually use these guiding principles when I'm thinking about planning my retirement. As you look at these in a few moments, hopefully you'll be able to see that you can use these for that type of activity as well. But again, they're here really to help you drive decision making, help you prioritize the work and what work needs to get done first, and then really help you look at ways that you can improve and review improvement opportunities. You can take these guiding principles, hopefully, and blend these into the culture of your organization and help shape that culture to help it become more of a service management, value-focused organization. Very important when we look at these to realize that they're not independent. You're very incestuous, really. You're going to see that they interact. They often depend on each other. You're not going to use one of them and not the others sometimes. You wouldn't necessarily use all of them. But they're, again, really just there to help you establish a system of beliefs and values that can guide your organization or guide you personally in decisions that you have to make. So let's take a quick look at these. We're going to talk about them in an order here, but again, I want you to understand that there is no real order to this. They can be considered in any order. This is just the way that we're going to look at them and talk about them here to kind of put some discipline around this a little bit, if you will. So the first principle we'll talk about is focus on value. And this really ensures that every action that you take, every decision that you make is really aimed at creating value for your stakeholders. And of course, you can only do that if you begin first by understanding who your stakeholders are and what value means to them. Notice I'm using the word stakeholder here because you have to create value for all your stakeholders. It's not just the service users or the service consumers, but really all of the stakeholders in the organization. And that can be the organization itself, the business owners, your shareholders, your employees. Everyone has to get value out of this if you're going to be successful. The next guiding principle we'll talk about is start where you are. And this means considering what you already have available to you instead of starting from scratch. Now, to do this, you first have to understand where you are and what you have by analyzing the existing state and do an assessment of where you are today, and then identify what can be leveraged to create the value that your service consumer and your other stakeholders really need. Now, Deming's Plan, Do, Check, Act quality model has long been a part of ITIL Foundation. And in this model, you plan what you're going to do, you do it, you check to see that you got the results that you intended, you act on those findings to plan your next step of what you're going to do. This progress iteratively with feedback principle really speaks to this same idea by, again, breaking down work into smaller, manageable, yet significant initiatives that require minimal effort but can be used to gather feedback before advancing to the next iteration. Now, if your organization's involved in Agile, you recognize this right away. This is part of the Agile development methodology. And that methodology is built around this idea with the concept of scrums and getting minimal requirements and then creating a minimum viable product, checking that with your stakeholder community to see how well it's going to work, how well it's going to meet their needs, and then taking the next step of moving that forward until you get to the point where you have a finished product or service that you can deliver out to them. The collaborate and promote visibility guiding principle really focuses on removing silos and building trust. And you can only do this when you have transparency and information is really shared across the organization and really with all of the stakeholders. Everyone has to be aware of what the other teams are doing and why that's important and how that fits in, and a lot of different ways to really do this with Kanban boards and other things that a lot of organizations are using today. But really it's about collaborating and making sure that you have some shared goals and that everyone's working towards those shared goals and everyone knows how everyone else really contributes to those shared goals. To think and work holistically, guiding principle is all about working as an integrated organization where all of the activities and their role in that activity and meeting the vision and producing value are really considered. Nothing today works on its own. All systems are complex. The pieces have to work together. You want to make sure that as you're doing something that you're not in some way restricting something that another group is working on or another piece of the final solution that another team is developing. You have to be aware of that. Another component of thinking and work holistically is just making sure that you're getting the most out of those 4 dimensions, that you're getting the most out of your organizations and people, your partners and suppliers, the information and technology, your value streams and processes, that you're using all of those very widely. Keep it simple and practical. My dad was in the Navy and they had another term for this, keep it simple, stupid, but it's really the same thing. You want to make sure that you simplify complex work by eliminating processes, procedures, service actions, metrics, anything that doesn't add value. Getting that out of the way so that you can work on those things that really allow your stakeholders to achieve the desired outcomes. Get it down into the simplest, easiest components that you can. Make sure that interfaces are very easy to use, they're very simple, they're very practical, and make that the focus of what you try to develop for your services and your products. Now, finally, optimize and automate. Now, I said that these are not in any particular order, and I also mentioned that these were originally part of ITIL guiding principles, or excuse me, part of ITIL practitioner. When these were first released in ITIL practitioner, this was actually 2 separate guiding principles. They combined them here because in this particular case, they do have to be done in a very specific order. You do want to make sure that you first optimize your value streams, your processes, your procedures, the way that you're doing these products, rolling out these services, and then only after you've optimized them will you look at being able to automate those. And again, you want to automate wherever you can, because optimizing work really gives you the efficiency and effectiveness you need by stripping away and minimizing the chance for human error, and also freeing up those human resources to do other things that are more critical and more needed for them to do. So you want to first optimize. You will use the other guiding principles here to really help you optimize in many cases. And then once you've effectively optimized, then you want to optimate and move forward from there. So these are the guiding principles. And again, I hope that you can see that these can be used for guidance on how you adopt and adapt ITIL. They can be used as guidance on how you implement a product or service, how you implement a process, how you do something in your personal life. Very useful to consider these guiding principles anytime that you have decisions that need to be made to make sure that those are very consistent. Now, I mentioned governance and how this is such a critical activity to ensure that as an organization, you're really following the business and the service management strategy that's been put in place, and that you have compliance to all of the policies and practices that you need to achieve really that strategy. Governance really begins with the simple step of evaluation. And this is where you're going to look at your strategy, your portfolios, what types of products and services you really need. Are you going to use partners? Are you going to have relationships with third-party suppliers? What kind of relationships will you really need to develop? And the organization really needs to do this evaluation of the organization on a regular basis as the business, the stakeholder needs, and the external circumstances are all going to evolve over time. Once we kind of know what the strategy needs to be and what we need to do, it's now time to direct. And this is where the governing body assigns responsibility for and directs the preparation and the implementation and of that organizational strategy and those policies. Now, of course, strategies really set the direction and the prioritization for organizational activity, for future investment, all of those kinds of things. And policies really establish the requirements for behavior across the organization, and where relevant, even the suppliers and partners and the other stakeholders that are involved. Now, once that direction has been provided, governance then needs to monitor the performance of the organization and those practices and the products and the services. And the purpose of this is to really ensure that there is compliance to the policies and that the directions are really being followed. And then once that's done, now it's time to step back and evaluate again to see if things have changed. We now need to build on this, add another piece of it. Again, this fits very tightly into our plan, do, check, act model we talked about. It fits very nicely into the progress iteratively with feedback. That's something that can be applied here when you're looking at governance as well. So the center component that we'll talk about here, as I mentioned, is the service value chain. And this is really the core, the central element within the service value system. And so we're going to take a little closer look at the activities that are here as part of this service value chain. Now, there are 6 value chain activities. Again, these are not in any particular order. When I did my first ITIL 4 training class, we kind of looked at this and kind of talked about the fact that there wasn't an order. They're not left to right. They're not top to bottom. You might do one without doing the other. You might repeat one several times. And the best analogy that we came up with was the idea of a pinball machine, where if you think about demand as being the silver ball, and you launch the silver ball into the service value chain, and it can bounce around from these different objects that are there. Each time it hits one of those objects, it's going to accumulate some more value until you get to the point where there's enough value within that product and service that you can turn it out to your customer or to your service consumer. So think of it that way. You'll see as we go through these, again, they're not in any particular order. We're going to present them in an order, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the order that you would apply these activities as you work through them. So starting at the top, let's talk about the planning activity. Now, the purpose here is really to ensure that everyone in the organization has a clear understanding of the vision, the current status against that vision, what our goals and objectives are, what's our improvement direction for, again, all of those 4 dimensions that we talked about. How are we going to use those to really create the products and services that we need across the organization? The engage activity is all about making sure that we communicate with our stakeholders and we've got a good understanding of our stakeholders' needs. And in doing that, that we're very transparent about that. We continually engage with them. We work to develop good relationships, keeping in mind, of course, that again, those stakeholders could be the service consumer, they could be the service user, they could be our suppliers and partners, they could be our internal teams that we're engaging with as part of this activity. The design and transition activity is where we ensure that the products and services are designed in a way and transitioned in the environment in a way to continually meet the stakeholders' requirements and their expectations for quality, for cost, for time to market. Again, thinking back to the service life cycle, this is very similar to the type of activity that was within the service life cycles for design and transition. The obtain and build activity is where we make sure that the service components that we need to make up those services are really available when and where they're needed and that they meet the agreed specifications. Now, more and more these days, we're not building everything. We're going out to third-party suppliers. We're using cloud systems. We're using a lot of different ways to obtain some of these components of the services that we're really turning out there. So regardless of whether we're obtaining it from a third-party supplier or we're building it internally, those activities are all within this stage of the service value chain or this activity of the service value chain. The deliver and support activity is where we ensure that the services are delivered and they're really supported according to the agreed specifications and the stakeholders' expectations. So are we meeting those service levels that we agreed to with them? Are we delivering and supported in that manner? Again, this value chain activity is very much similar to the operations part of the service life cycle from version 3. The improve activity, as I mentioned earlier, you see this in the value chain, you see it in the service value system. We're going to talk about it in a few moments here as part of the practice. But this is where we ensure that we've got continual improvement of the products, the services, and the practices across all the value chain activities and the 4 dimensions of service management. If we're going to improve our products and services, really what we're very often doing is make improvements to our capabilities within those 4 dimensions. Now, again, these activities, this service value chain, really represents the steps that the organization takes in the creation of value. And as I said, they're not in any particular order as you would work them here. They interact with one another. The inputs from one activity may be the outputs of another activity. They all interact, but they're all required in order to be able to really turn that demand into value or turn that opportunity into value for our customers and consumers. Now, I've mentioned value streams, practices, and processes, and they may seem like we're all talking about the same thing when we talk about these, but they all are a little bit different, although they're very much dependent on one another. A value stream, if you are in an agile environment or a DevOps environment, you're probably very familiar with this term. If you've been in ITIL for years, you probably have not heard of this before. I guarantee you that you go back to the ITIL V3 or V2 books, you won't find this definition or this term there. This is really new within ITIL 4. But again, it really speaks to the idea that we need to blend in with Agile and with DevOps and the concepts and the way that those methodologies and frameworks work to really develop what we need for service management. So a value stream is defined as a series of steps that the organization takes to create and deliver products and services out to our service consumers. And it's really a combination of the organization's value chain activities. So it's, again, the way the pinball really moves through those value chains that create this value stream. The practices then are work within the value streams themselves. And these are sets of organizational resources that are really designed for performing work or accomplishing an objective. So again, it's how you use those 4 dimensions to really execute the activities within these value streams. And then finally, a process is really a set of interrelated or interacting activities that transform inputs into outputs. We take those, we define the sequence of actions or workflow, the dependencies around those, and we take one or more of those inputs and turn them into defined outputs for that particular process. Their processes are usually detailed in procedures, which outline who's involved in the process, what the roles and responsibilities are. We may include some work instructions there, but it really details how we're going to carry out this particular piece. So the processes, as you're going to see, are part of now the practices. They're developed within those practices, but recognition that the processes are not all there is to what we need to have, that along with those processes, you need to have the organizations of people, the partners and suppliers, the information and technology, and the value streams. So let's take a look at how this really all can kind of work together here. And let's talk about a value stream for a new service feature where we want to be able to turn opportunity into value for our service consumer. In this case, let's say that the opportunity is we've got a request for a new service feature, something we have not done before. So this would be defined as an opportunity. We would first engage as part of our value chain activity. So we would engage with this requester, and we would acknowledge the fact that they've made this request, and we document their demand and really try to understand what it is that they're asking us to do. And it says demand here, but we're really documenting the opportunity of what it is that they're asking us to do, why this is important to them, how they think this will suit their business needs, what they really need us to accomplish with this particular new feature for the service that's there. The next activity we would go into would be the plan activity. And this is where we'd look at how does this fit into our portfolio? You know, what's the cost? What's the benefit? What's the risk involved with doing or adding this particular new feature? Is it something that we should do? And is it something that we can do? And then we would start to really begin planning out the work of, at a high level, how we're really going to accomplish this. We would then move into design and transition. And this is where we're going to review the existing service and take a look at this to see can we make the modifications that are needed to really accommodate this opportunity that we have for a new feature that our service consumer really needs. And we're going to start to design that in. In doing that, we might identify the need to create some new service components or go out and obtain some new service components. So we would now be in our obtain and build value chain activity to actually go get those service components, get them brought in. At that point, we're now going to send our pinball back to design and transition, because once those components are available, we now need to modify the existing service, and then through transition, we're going to release and deploy that new feature into the various environments to test it, get it into the user acceptance environment, to a pre-prod environment, and eventually, hopefully, into a production environment where we can then deliver and support that product and service out to our customer that's asked for it. And at that point, we've really created value because now the users can utilize this new feature to perform a business task. So that gives you an idea of how this particular value stream might work. Hopefully you can see that there could be a lot of different processes and practices that would be involved in doing this. Everything from a request management practice perhaps to a release and deployment practice to change management. You know, all of those might really fit into this as part of what we need to do to manage this value stream. Let's take another look at something that's probably a little more common to some of you, and that would be just a simple service failure. Now, in this case, we've got demand because we have an application that's unavailable to a user. They could use it before. It's not working today. It's not a request for a new service. It's something they've had and it's no longer working, something we would call an incident. At this point, we're going to begin with the value chain activity or the service value chain activity of engage, where the user contacts the service desk. And of course, we're going to log this incident. We're going to understand how urgent it is to this user, what the impact it is on their business. We're going to categorize it to determine where we would need to route it. We're going to gather all that information. At that point, we would move into our deliver and support activity. And in this case, we're going to say that our service desk is going to do some initial triage. And as part of that, they might look at the CMDB and see that there is a network issue out there, and the path to this application goes through that. So they might determine that there's a potential network issue that has to be looked into here. At this point, we're back to engage again, because now our service desk is going to engage with our network support team. They're going to escalate this incident to them. And in doing that, they're going to make sure that they understand how this is impacting the user or the service consumer who reported this, why it's important to them to get it fixed, and what are all the steps that the service desk team perhaps has done to diagnose this and determine that there is in fact a network issue here. At that point, our network engineer is going to be in the value chain activity for deliver and support. And they are going to do some additional triage of this, some troubleshooting. And let's say, for our example here, that they identify that there's a failed component. They've got let's say a router card that's bad, or a NIC card or something like that that's bad that they need to have replaced. So we would go to our value chain activity for obtain and build. And in this particular case, we've got to reach out to one of our partners, our suppliers, and we've got to get a replacement for the component that's failing. Now, when we do this, we're actually entering into their value chain and their value stream, because at that point, we're becoming demand into that third-party supplier's value stream. And we're placing demand with them. They're going to engage with us, understand what it is that we really need, why it's important to us to get it very quickly so that we can get our service back up and again. They're going to go into deliver and support mode and deliver that service out to us. And we're going to get that back into our environment. And once we've obtained it, we're ready now to go into the design and transition mode again, where we're going to now deploy and test that component to make sure that it does fix what we need to fix. This is where we might engage change management at this point as a process to really help us get this put into place and move it into the environment. At that point, we're going to go back again to engage, because now the service desk is going to contact that user, confirm that the incident was actually resolved, and we completed our service value chain. Because the user has value, they're able to access the application and perform the business tasks that they really need to do. So there's just an example of how the value stream, the practices, the processes really all can work together as part of ITIL 4. Now, I've been talking about the practices, and again, the practices are the sets of organizational resources that are designed for performing work or accomplishing an objective. They are made up again of the 4 dimensions. Those are the organizational resources we're talking about here. And in ITIL 4, they've organized these management practices into 3 categories: 14 general management practices, where they've looked at the organizations that just do general management very well, looked at how they do the management of their enterprise, of their companies, from a financial standpoint, from a management standpoint, portfolio standpoint, all of those kinds of things. We also have 17 service management practices, which really looked at the ITSM industry and other service management organizations to see how they do service management and collect some information about those practices. And then we have 3 technical management practices, which have been adapted from the technology management domain for service management purposes by really expanding and shifting the focus from technology solutions back to IT services. So that's how they've organized these. When we look at those 34 practices, they really kind of shake out with this eye chart that you see here. There's a lot here. Don't let this overwhelm you, though. If you really think about what ITIL is really all about, no one is going to necessarily go in and try to implement all 34 of these practices. But I guarantee you that if you're doing service management for IT today, you're doing every one of these 34 things that are shown here. in some way or another. And what ITIL is really there for is if you are struggling in one particular area, you could look to ITIL for guidance in that area, pick up those practices, see what the best organizations are doing in that particular area, and see how you can adopt and adapt that to fit your needs. You know, I hear people all the time talking about we're going to implement ITIL. Well, I'm sorry, but you don't implement ITIL. You adopt and adapt things from ITIL, and you implement some of the best practices that you see, but you really don't implement ITIL itself. Now, you'll see when you look at this that you'll recognize a lot of the practices that are here as being the same things that were processes in ITIL version 3. But again, when we're talking about them here as practices, we're taking them far beyond just the processes themselves. You'll see some ones here that have changed a little bit. You'll see that change management is now called change enablement. If you've already taken some ITIL 4 courses, they might have called it change control when you were taking it. ITIL is really, they're really kind of following their own dogma here a little bit and progressing iteratively with feedback. When they changed this from change management to change control, they did show for a very good reason. That reason being that organizational change management is now part of these practices, and they wanted to differentiate between the two. But they got a lot of pushback on using the term control. So they've now gone to change enablement to talk about this particular practice. But the underlying meat of the practice is still the same kind of thing. But you'll see, again, a lot of the same practices here that you saw as processes with an ITIL version 3. The ones that are in the green color here are the ones that we talk about with an ITIL version 4 in the foundations course. That are ones that are in kind of the teal color are ones that are really just mentioned within the foundations course to discuss the purpose of them. The others that are here will be information that will be released for these particular practices and something that'll be coming out a little later this year called practice guides. And I've started to see some of these already in draft mode. They're not ready for publication yet. But when these practice guides are released, what they're going to do is give you some general information about the purpose and description of that practice. What are some of the key terms and concepts that are used for the practice? They're going to introduce something that's new within ITIL 4 called the practice success factors, which are very similar to what we refer to as critical success factors before in ITIL. But this deals really with that specific practice itself. And then once you've determined those the practice success factors, of course, the key performance indicators that you can use to help determine whether or not you're achieving those practice success factors. Within the practice guide, you'll see how the various processes and activities for that practice contribute to the service value chain activities and how they fit into those different value streams and processes. It'll talk about the organizations and people, the type of competencies and roles that you would need to have for that practice, give you some guidance on how you might organize your team or your organization to best manage that type of a practice. There'll be information and technology aspects, talking about the information objects that you might need to collect for that type of a practice, what kind of tooling and automation could be used to help you in that area. And then finally, looking at partners and suppliers, what kind of sourcing considerations you might want to make, or what kind of third-party relationships might you need to really support that practice. So again, these are not available yet. These will be coming out very shortly here. Look forward to being able to share those with you. As soon as we can share those, we'll put together some webinars, of course, and share those out as we can. Now, I want to wrap the discussion on the service value chain up by talking about service value system, rather, with talking about continual improvement. Again, this is something that they've expanded on what was in version 3. If you're familiar with the continual improvement approach from version 3, this will look very familiar to you. You know, it begins, of course, with understanding what's the vision. And to do that, we need to look at the business vision, the mission, the goals and objectives that the business has, and then start to understand that from an IT perspective, what are the critical success factors? What do we need to do in order for the business to be successful in achieving their vision? Once we've determined what those critical success factors are, we need to start to look at where are we now against that. And this is where we do a baseline assessment. Again, going back to our guiding principles of start where you are. How well are we doing currently with helping them get towards this vision, mission, goal, and objectives? And then once we've determined how well we're doing now, we can start to look at where do we want to be. And this is where we want to set some measurable targets for not where do we want to be when we've achieved the vision, mission, goals, and objectives, but where do we want to be 30 days from now, 60 days, 90 days, next quarter, next year, and make sure that those are very well-established targets with some time frames around them. And once we have those in place, now we need to start to look at how do we really get there. And this is where we'll start to put together our service and our practice improvement plans of what kind of improvements do we need to make, what types of practices do we need to implement, what can we do within our 4 dimensions to help us achieve these targets, what can we do differently or better within those 4 dimensions. As part of the next step of this, we need to take action. And this is where version 3 and version 4 are a little bit different, or not version 4, but ITIL 4. In version 3, this step was not there. I guess we just kind of assumed that once you knew how you were going to get there, you'd go ahead and get there. But organizations have really come to realize that it takes a lot to actually execute these improvement actions. And there's some guidance that's needed to help the organization take the action that they really need so that they can then determine did they get there. And that really means looking at 4 specific areas. And again, each one of these, if you think back to what you saw a few moments ago in the practices, each one of these is now a practice with an ITIL. So there'll be some guidance in here about how to do these. Very happy to see organizational change management be here. Anytime that you're trying to make improvements, whether that be an improvement in a process, whether it's improvements in tools, whether it's improvements in the way people need to work, there's a need for organizational change management. You're trying to change the behaviors of people and the attitudes of people. And it's something that takes a lot of effort and a lot of work, and it's something that very often gets overlooked and organizations don't do. So when you're trying to make these improvements, very important that you have a plan for organizational change management, you execute that plan, and you have, again, some guidance coming to you in ITIL now as exactly how to develop that plan and how to do that. You'll also see that with ITIL 4, there is now a practice around measurement and reporting. Whenever you're making improvements, of course, very important that you establish baselines, that you create those metrics, and then be able to tie those to your key performance indicators and back to your critical success factors. There will now be a practice around providing that guidance to do measurement and reporting. Risk management was always something that was talked about within ITIL 4 or an ITIL version 3. But now, again, within ITIL 4, there's going to be some additional guidance into how to do risk management and how to really accomplish this. Before, ITIL version 3 just referred you to other methodologies. Now there'll be guidance there on how to do that. And then continual improvement, as I mentioned, they have the approach we've been talking about here, but there'll also be a practice around that that will discuss how you can really use your 4 dimensions to do continual improvement. So that, again, is the step that was added to taking action to help us understand really how to get to where we need to be. I'm going to jump now to the last couple of slides here in the interest of time, and really just briefly kind of mention the fact that, again, the purpose behind ITIL 4 is really to make sure that we can integrate well with all these other frameworks that are out there. We've talked a little bit already about Agile and Scrum, how important that is in today's environment, and how we need to integrate better to that. We've talked about how we've shared now some concepts with Agile and that methodology. We've talked about Lean a little bit and making sure that your practices, your value streams are very lean, using some of the principles and guidance from Lean to actually help do that. Kanban boards, if you're not familiar with those, are just a way to really collaborate and promote visibility, to allow everybody to see the work that's in play and how that work is progressing and who's working on what and what's in their backlog, what's being worked on today. The DevOps environment is really very heavily into the optimize and automate pieces that we've talked about within ITIL 4. That's a very large component of what we're trying to do within a DevOps environment. I did mention Prince 2 and PMBOK when we started out earlier, but it's very important as you're implementing ITIL that you're using some good project management principles to put some project management discipline around the adaptations that you're trying to do of ITIL and the projects that your initiatives that you're trying to put in place and the tool implementations you're doing, all of that sort of activity. Kepner and 4A is fairly new to the game here, but this is a methodology for problem management that's very effective in making sure that you get to the root cause the first time and you're not wasting a lot of time and a lot of effort chasing symptoms rather than trying to get to that root cause. Cloud computing, of course, very much in the environment today. A lot of the reason for ITIL 4 was organizations now having to deal with cloud computing and manage those kind of environments a little better, and those being very much a part of service management. COBIT 5, ITIL, of course, is a framework. It's not a standard, but if you're looking for some standard around the implementation or the adoption of ITIL, COBIT 5 certainly offers that in giving you some guidance on what you absolutely have to be doing in order to control your IT environments. So just an idea again of some of the other frameworks that are out there that are intended to integrate into ITIL 4. So I want to wrap this up with just a brief discussion on the certification scheme itself. As you've seen, there's a lot that's new in ITIL 4. So regardless of where you are today, if you're an ITIL expert, if you are taking a foundation course in V3, if you've taken some of the intermediate courses, to get into ITIL 4, you really need to take an ITIL 4 foundation course. Everyone has to take that as a starting point into the certification for ITIL 4. Once you've taken the ITIL Foundation certification course, you could now work towards these other areas. Each one of the areas that you see here will be courses that are there to cover a specific area or a specific idea or concept within service management. Create, deliver, and support, drive stakeholder value, high velocity IT, direct, plan, and improve. There'll be books around each one of these individually. There'll be courses there. What you won't see in these courses and in these books is a lot of the practice information. It'll be talked about at a conceptual level, but you'll really need to go to those practice guides to really get the detail on how those practices. But within these courses, we'll talk about how those practices are used as part of addressing each one of the topics that are here. There's also a path just for individuals who need to have a strategic leadership role. They'll share one of the courses, the ITIL strategist course and book, with managing professional, but there's a specific course and a specific book that's just around the digital and IT strategy from a leadership perspective. Now, there is no bridge course for foundation or for any of these intermediate courses that are here. If you were an existing ITIL expert or you have 17 credits towards becoming an ITIL expert, there is a managing professional transition course. I'm proud to say I just completed this course and got this certification. That will then allow you to be seen as an ITIL managing professional without having to take all 4 of these courses that are here. But there's probably a small audience of you who would be able to really take advantage of that. There is a fast track that's out there and available if you were working towards getting those 17 credits. There are some organizations that offer a fast track that allows you to, for one price, take a number of the courses to get you up to those 17 credits. That's an option that you have a limited amount of time to be able to take advantage of before those courses will expire and you'll no longer be able to do that. And of course, finally, if you really want to go for the top of the ladder, there's the ITIL Master, where you have to complete all the modules that are shown below, gain designations in both of those streams, and then along with that, be able to show that you have participated in the body of knowledge for ITIL, that you've led demos, done implementations, taught classes, all of those kinds of things, and then you would go before a certification committee to be recognized as an ITIL Master. So that's the certification scheme that's out there. I hope that you've enjoyed the presentation today. You've learned enough, hopefully, to pique your interest and get you involved in taking a foundation course and learning more about ITIL. And we'd be glad to talk with you about doing that at some point in time. And with that, Rich, I'll turn it back over to you.
Chuck, first of all, I want to congratulate you yet again on getting that certification. I believe I got to see that yesterday, and that's awesome. And you're just plowing right through these certs, so this is great. Great stuff. Audience, if you have any questions at all in regards to ITIL 4, please reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278. You can also chat with us live on our website. with our IT professionals Monday through Friday during normal business hours, or email us at info@flycastpartners.com. I appreciate each and every one of you taking time out of your very busy day to join us for today's presentation. Chuck, thank you for your time. I know it's valuable.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad to do it, Rich.
Excellent. Folks, until our next webinar next Thursday, we'll see you then.